Okay, we are back. We have our rig done, and it is now time to take a look at animation. Now, specifically speaking, we are talking about keyframe animation, which is worthy of its own little corner of the whiteboard and its own drawing. Keyframe animation. Now, Chris, are you still with us? Chris, can I hear you speak, or is it impossible for you to speak? It's okay if you can't. I'm just asking.
No, I can speak.
You can speak. Okay. Chris, what's a keyframe?
Hello.
What is a keyframe, Chris?
A keyframe. It is a recording of an object's settings at a particular time along a timeline.
Beautiful.
Or a particular point along a timeline.
Beautiful. I'll change the wording very slightly, but I'm going to say the exact same thing. It is the recording of an attribute value at a given time. That is it, and that is all. Here's how it works. If you have an object, and this is not an object, strangely enough, but let me draw a graph. Everybody see it? You guys remember this graph from when you were in algebra class, like a long time ago, or maybe yesterday? And let's do, I don't know, let's do frame 0 and frame 100. This is how keyframe animation works. You have an attribute value over time charted out on a graph. So you will record an attribute at some value, and let's just assume it's at 0 and this goes up to 10. Let's just assume you record it here at time of 0 at a value of 0. And then you go 100 frames later and you record it again at a value of 10. That's it. All you've done is you've told the computer, at time 0, I want you to be here. At time 100, I want you to be here. The computer actually does all of the work in between. It is so cool. It actually saves you a whole lot of time over the old school stop motion method where you had to go every single frame and say, now I want you to be here, now I want you to be there. Yes, it is called interpolation. This curve that I just drew actually exists inside of Maya, and it is created by Maya. You do not have to create it. These go by a lot of names. These are interpolation curves. They are function curves. Often just F curves for short. They are animation curves. But they all mean the same thing. They are just a curve created by the 3D application to get you from point A to point B. Here's how I'm going to demo them really, really fast. Let us save our scene. So hit Control S, save this, and I'm going to do a brand new scene. So there we go. And I'll go ahead and turn the grid back on so everybody can see this. Now, I'm going to create an object. I don't know what kind of object. Let's just make it up. So I'll go to Create, let's do Polygon Primitives, and let's just do a sphere. They're so easy to make. So just make a sphere. I don't really care where it goes either. And what we're going to do is animate this sphere in we're going to record keyframes on this sphere at 2 different times, and we're going to watch the resulting animation. Okay? Now, there's a careful and precise way to add keyframes, and there's the fast and sloppy way to add keyframes. We'll do both. So, here's the sloppy way. Here at time of 1, now make sure you can see your time slider, okay? So here at time of 1, actually this is frame 1, I'm going to press the S key. This is the big, nasty, sloppy way. And I'll hit 5 so we can see everything. Now, I'm going to move my time slider. There is a process to this. Move the time slider first. So move the time slider to 24. Let's move our sphere to another location and press S again. We have just created animation. If you take a look on your timeline, you'll see there's a red line here and a red line here. Those are keyframes. Now drag your timeline. You have motion. Because you told Maya, at the beginning, I want you to be here. At the end, I want you to be here. And Maya took care of everything in between. Now, that understood, let's take a look at something else. I want you to go under your Panels menu, go under Saved Layouts, and you should be able to find an option for Persp Graph. It's a little more than halfway down. This gives you the graph editor and the perspective view in one nice convenient layout. Now here in your graph editor, just tap the F key. It does the same thing that it does in the perspective view. It just frames everything up so you can see everything. And to make everything simple, I want you to click just on Translate Y and tap F. So we have just the attribute Translate Y. Here at the beginning, we told it to be, or we told our sphere to be at a location of 18.702. Actually, yeah, that is, I'm sorry, it's at 0. I had the other key selected, so I was getting 18.72. So at the beginning, we had a Y translate value of 0, which I'm just verifying here. We're not going to worry too much about this window at the moment. Then we said at frame 24, we want you to have a value of 18.702, and Maya took care of the transition from point A to point B. That's the very essence of keyframe animation. You give the computer the beginning, you give it the end, and it deals with everything in the middle. Now, what I want to focus on for just a minute is this section of curvature that takes place in between, because different curves mean different things. Right now, we have this S-shaped curve. Can anybody fancy a guess as to what type of motion an S-shaped curve like this is really defining? No, I haven't seen an answer that I like yet. Describe the motion to me. Smooth. That's accelerated move. That's getting closer. Slow beginning, slow end. That's really close. Nobody gets a cookie. Nobody said anything that I want to see because you're all trying to type way too fast. We have animation that is going to speed up. So if you're familiar with the concept of acceleration curves, then you're already good to go on animation curves because it's really kind of all they are. A flat line is no animation. In fact, if you want to back in the back of your head, just consider a flat line to be dead. It's the same thing because that means it's sustaining the same value across time and it's not changing. So we're starting with a curve that right here at the beginning is almost flat, meaning we're getting almost no motion. Then our curve gets steeper, meaning we are accelerating. But then after a time, our curve starts to flatten back out, meaning we are slowing back down. So we have animation that starts slow, speeds up, and then slows back down. And if I hit play, we can see that, but it may be really hard to see at this number of frames. Now, if I give us a whole lot more frames, like if I give it, say, 500 frames and we were to reanimate this, it would be a lot easier to see. In fact, let's go ahead and give that a try. I'm just going to delete out all of my keys. So I'll click on Translate X, drag down to Visibility, right-click, and just choose Delete Selected. No more keys. And let's do something really basic. Let's just say we start here pretty much at 0. In fact, we can go ahead and just set everything to 0. That'll be fine. At the beginning of our animation, I'm going to just pick on Translate Y. That's my up and down motion. Hold down the right mouse button, and now I can choose Key Selected. This is the nice, slow way to do this. So we're only keying what we need. Now let's go all the way 500 frames later. Actually, I'm not going to go that far. Let's just go 100 frames later. Good Lord. We're going to move this up a little bit, hold down right mouse again, and choose Key Selected. So now when I rewind and hit play, you can see it speeds up, and it slows back down. That's all there is to it. Speed up, slow back down. And all of that is defined by the curve, as I mentioned earlier. Now, if you don't fully understand that right now, that's okay. This is just sort of a quick, get your feet wet sort of animation lecture, and you can take an entire class over animation. I could teach an entire class over this. But let's do kind of a quick little quiz to see who's understanding. What type of motion do you think is described by this curve? Describe this motion to me. Let's see who in BuzzNet gets the cookie. Ramp? It doesn't describe it to me at all. How would the change look? How would the motion look? Anyone? I don't care if you've been doing this stuff. Moving object moves slower over time. Speeds up and then slow. MVA is the closest. So MVA, you get the cookie. Ease out doesn't describe the motion. So that's completely wrong. Speeds up and then slows down is incorrect because we're not actually speeding up. Here's some tricks and shortcuts to sort of help you read an animation curve. Slope equals speed. The higher the incline, the faster something is traveling. The lower the incline, the slower it's going. So we're starting off at the very beginning. Very fast. We're not even accelerating. We're going from 0 straight to a fast speed. Then notice over time, our slope is getting lower and lower until it's almost flat at the very end. So that means we're starting off fast, and all throughout here, we're slowing down. All right. Now, keeping that in mind, what sort of curve is, or what sort of motion is defined by this? Remember, slope is going to be equal to speed. So describe this motion to me. And I've got no answers yet. Either we have some slow typists or nobody's trying it out. Slow start, fast end. Okay, I'll go with that. We're starting off very slow because our curve is very nearly flat. Then steadily our curve gets steeper and steeper so that by the end we're going very fast. Tell me a little bit about the beginning and the end. What is happening right at the beginning and the end? Anything special? Describe the stop to me. Looks like a crash. That's right. It's an abrupt stop. Very good. Very good. Okay. Last one, I promise. Some of this I think you're really only going to get if you practice a little bit. Hush flash. Okay. What type of motion do we have here? Steady. Perfect. We begin at a constant rate, we end at a constant rate. The slope does not change, therefore the rate of motion does not change. So MMO Dust claims that cookie. Good job. That's really all you need to know to get started creating your own keyframe animation. It's actually a pretty easy process. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get things underway in creating our very own animations. Riri Show just asked an interesting question. He said, but it's moving up, isn't it? Here's some words of wisdom from me to you. Now, some of you may not be programmers, so I'm going to read this out after I write it. Actually, we won't do the programming one. We'll do this one. There you go. This is universal truth. Motion is always animation. Animation is not always motion. Because you can animate a lot of things that have nothing at all to do with motion. You can animate the color of an object, the brightness of a light. You can animate how many particles are leaving a particle emitter at any given time. None of those things have to do with motion. So don't let yourself fall into the all too common trap of thinking that anytime you're animating, something is moving, because that's not always going to be the case. For instance, I could easily take my graph here and have 3 curves. This curve could be for red, this curve could be for green, and this curve could be for blue. And all I'm doing is transitioning from one color to another color. That is not motion, but it is indeed animation. Okay, so with just that much in place, let's get back over here and let's reopen our files. And we don't need to save changes. So we're going to create some animation. I'm going to give you guys a bit of a tip, or kind of a look into the future. This is also for you, Chris. Your homework for this week is going to be to complete this animation, and you will be animating the stem. I'm going to make the cherry bounce up and down. I'm going to make it squash. I'm going to make it stretch. But I'm not going to animate the stem on camera. That will be your test to see how much of this you're following along with. I don't expect you to do it perfectly. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. So let's go back to panels and jump over to save layouts, and let's go back to persp and graph. As a matter of fact, I don't even want perspective. Let's hold down the space bar, and here on the Maya symbol in the middle, let's go to a side view. Now, I like the idea of animating from left to right on these, and a side view would force us to animate I'm sorry, I want to go from left to right. This would force us to go from right to left. I don't want to do that. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's go to View, Predefined Bookmarks, and go to Left Side. Riri show, I have no idea what that even means. Okay. Now, here's the catch. Let's go ahead and show our table. So, Window, Hypergraph, Hierarchy. Here's our table. And Shift H will show that. And all that does, that gives us a baseline to work off of. So, I would go ahead and begin by getting our table here, our little locator right down onto the surface of the table. In fact, in this case, it may be nicer just to turn on the grid, just so we can kind of see things a little more clearly. So we'll set it right down. In fact, we can just set translate Y straight up to 0. Now, the way I'm going to animate this is going to be in layers. I'm not going to animate everything at once. And if you can break it down in your head, I recommend that you do the same. It will make your life much, much, much easier as you become an animator. So for starters, let's figure out how long we want our animation to be. I'm going to take some notes real fast. We are going to have 3 jumps. Each jump will be equal to 30 frames. This will look pretty good played back at 30 frames a second or 24, so whatever we have it set to will be just fine. We're just going to leave it at defaults though, just FYI. So each jump will be 30 frames. That's 3 different jumps. How many frames is that in all? 90. MMO Dust gets the I can do very, very simple math cookie. Alright, so let's go ahead and set up our timeline. Now watch this. Here's my range slider. I'm going to take the inner number on the right-hand side of the range slider. I'm actually going to set this to 100. That gives you an additional 10 frames or so in case you want to waggle the stem a little bit longer. You can make that longer or shorter, however you need to. But really, I'm only interested in the first 90 frames of this. I'm also going to turn on a feature called Auto Key. It's this little tiny key that you see sitting in the lower right-hand corner of the interface. By turning this on, all we have to do is move the time slider and reposition our object after we get our first keyframe down, and it'll automatically create keyframes for us. It's very handy when you need it, but it's also a bit of a nightmare if you don't want it to be on and you forget about it, so definitely remember I said that. Ryan asked a question quite a bit earlier. He said, is there any setting an animator will use for their own timing? What if Maya doesn't move an asset fast enough for what it is they're doing? This is where knowing what your frame rate is and the animator animating accordingly. So if we knew that we were playing back at 24 frames per second, which is the standard for film, then we know that if we need 5 seconds of film for that one sequence, then we're going to have 120 frames. So it is a little bit of math in your head. Okay. So what I want is to pause the video real quick, and I want everybody to get to this point. Your cherry should be on one side of your cake. Preferably, you're animating down the z-axis, so you've gone to View, Predefined Bookmarks, and chosen left side. It will make things a little easier for you to follow along with me. I want you to set your timeline to 100 frames, and make sure that you have your cherry control locator selected. Okay, as a reminder, make sure that auto key is on. It will make things much, much easier. What we want to do right now is just animate the location of this cherry. And I'm going to show you guys a trick. Who can remember the hotkey for the move tool? Tell me real quick who gets the super fast cookie. Oh god, it's already been so long. Ben gets it. NATO said 3? What? NATO, beat your face against the desk for a minute. You were doing a countdown. Well, I guess I should have known that. Okay. Well, I thought you meant that 3 would be the move tool number, and obviously that's wrong. Okay, so if you hit W, that opens the move tool. Watch what happens if you hit... Nice, NATO. Watch what happens if you hit Shift W. So select my cherry and hit Shift W. I have just placed keyframes on our translates only. So I'm keying motion. So make sure your time slider is at 1. Select your cherry control locator and press Shift W to create your first keyframe. All right, next, here's how we're going to be doing this in layers. All I want you to do is move all the way to frame 90 and then place your cherry right on top of the cake. That's it. Now you've already got motion. Your cherry is now making the transition from its starting position right to the end. And I'll give everybody a second to catch up to that. Okay, moving along. The next thing we're going to do is change the nature of this motion. Right now, you'll notice this motion, if I hit F and take a look at it, has that S-curve shape. So we're speeding up and slowing down. And I don't want to do that. So we're going to select both of these curves. Just drag a marquee selection box around both the curves, and that will grab all the keyframes. And right up here inside our little toolbar, we have a linear tangents button. You'll see it. It looks like a little tiny keyframe with a straight line coming down kind of diagonally from it. It says linear tangents. Click on that. It just makes everything linear. What that allows is for our cherry to be moving forward at a constant rate, which is what we want for this particular animation. Okay. Now, once you have that, we're going to be setting up the rest of our jumps. So we went straight from frame 1 to frame 90. Now go to frame 30, and all I want you to do is come over here to translate Y and set it to 0. Now your cherry is sliding forward between frame 1 and frame 30. Go to frame 60 and do the same thing. Set it to 0. Now you should notice that your cherry probably goes right through your cake at this point. That's okay. It might. I mean, it depends on how far back you were when you started. If you were farther back than I was, you might be just fine. But you're probably clipping at least some part of it. But this is exactly what you want. Now let's do another quick ready check while people get to this point. What I want to see is a keyframe at 1, the keyframe at 30, which has just slid you forward, the one at 60, which just slid you forward, and then at 90, you fly up to the top of the cake. Now we're going to turn these intervals into jumps. So start here at frame 15 and pull your cherry up into the air. Now I'm going to pull it up to just about the level of the top of the cake. You see it goes up and it comes back down. Then I'll go to frame 45 and do the same thing. I'm going to pull it up higher, a little higher above the actual cake. Then go to 75 and I'm going to pull it even higher, so way up into the air. Now notice something. Because I was only moving the object on the y-axis, only the y-axis has received additional keyframes. The z-axis is still just two keyframes, which is a very efficient way to animate. I really wish there were other apps that did that as well. UDK. So we're waving up and down. Before we continue, let's do one more ready check. You technically have an up and down motion, but it doesn't look anything at all like a bounce. Okay, now we need to turn this into a bounce. Can anybody tell me why we don't have bouncing behavior right now? You can look at the curve, and the curve actually defines it rather well. But who can actually turn that into words for me? I'm taking a look at BuzzNet, and I'm looking for somebody to explain it to me. I realize this may take a little bit of typing, so I'll give you just a moment to get it out. There's no abrupt stop between the up and down segments. That's pretty good, Ben. I'll go with that. If you were to look at the up and down motion of a bouncing ball, a bouncing ball does not move up and down in a wave-like pattern. Why? Because these parts where it's starting to flatten back out mean the ball is slowing down before it hits the ground. You remember the film Independence Day? If you don't and you haven't seen it, then shame on you. That was the big thing about Independence Day, when they realized that this thing coming toward the Earth was not, in fact, just a meteor or something, that it was, or not an asteroid, that it was something being controlled because it was slowing down. And you don't want that. You want it to have full impact into the ground. So a bouncing ball will have a trajectory that looks a lot like this. And that's what we need to create. So let's go back over to Maya, and we'll make this happen. Here's how you need to do it. You need to select all of these keys where the ball is on the ground. So there's 4 of those that you need to select. Then, here in your toolbar, there's this little button that says Break Tangents. You'll see it kind of looks like little tangent handles that have been snapped in half, making a little V shape, red on the left, white on the left, red on the right. Click on that. By doing that, we can now take these tangent handles and bend them in 2 separate directions. So watch this. If I start here at the first key, now here's how you have to do this. You have to select the key, So select the key, then select the tangent handle, and then you can move it. So I'll just tilt this up a little bit further. Now let's grab this next one. This is where it starts to get interesting. So I'll select the key, like so. I'll select the left tangent and middle mouse drag to lift it. I'm moving this with middle mouse, not left mouse. Middle mouse is always good for moving things in Maya, and use left mouse for selecting stuff. Grab the other side, lift it up with middle mouse, and look what we're starting to get. A nice arc that bounces. And we can even check this first one. If I drag really, really slowly, take it easy, Ben. Look at that. We got a really nice bounce right there. Perfect. So now let's grab the next one. Select the key, Select the left tangent, middle mouse drag to give it a little more of an arc shape. Select the right tangent, middle mouse drag to give it a little more of an arc shape. Test that very slowly. We have first bounce, second bounce, and land. And now I'm not even really clipping the plate. Now our last curve, we're just going to take that left tangent and just pull it up a little ways, like so. And there you have it. So I want to go ahead and give a quick ready check for people to get to this point. You should now have a much bouncier look to your motion. Okay, we've got our motion in place. We are now bouncing. Now, if I was really feeling kind of frisky, I might make a little bit of a change here, because you'll notice my last bounce is right here next to the edge of the plate. Maybe I don't want it to look like my cherry had to clip that. So I could just take my Z translate and slide that back a little bit. See how that adds one more point in my curve? One more little keyframe? But now watch what that has done to the motion. First bounce, second bounce. I'm sorry. First bounce, second bounce is now back here, and then we land in the cherry. The only thing I would do, excuse me, is make sure that I set all of my tangents to linear. That way, it looks like he doesn't accelerate halfway through that last jump. So it's like a tiny jump, bigger jump, and then his third jump has a lot more forward momentum. Now, you may not have to do that on your end. That's just something I did to kind of clean mine up just a little bit. Okay, now we're going to animate squash and stretch. Here's the good news. This is very, very easy. I don't really have any bad news. I'm going to turn off my grid just so that we can get a bit of a closer look at the cherry without so much visual interference. And what I want you to do is start off here at frame 1, hold down the right mouse button on squash stretch, and choose key selected. That places your first keyframe. We're going to start with a negative value. So basically, begin by squashing your cherry down. Also, down here in your graph editor, click on squash stretch, and that'll show you this curve while we build it, which is actually pretty cool. Now, watch this. I'm going to scrub forward in time to right about halfway, maybe a little less than halfway, to the apex of our jump. So maybe about 6 or 7 frames. And I'm just going to take squash stretch and increase it. I'm not going all the way to 1. Let's say just a value of positive 0.3. Maybe that's really all I need. And if you take a look, our cherry is now stretching out as soon as he goes up into the air. So you can do that at about frame 5 or 6. I might pull it back a little further, but 6 will do just fine, so I won't redo it. Now, here's what I want you to do. Go to frame 25 or so, maybe even 26. Just somewhere just prior to landing, just a couple of frames before you actually impact the ground. So I'll go to frame 27 actually. Take your squash stretch and set it back to 0. Why? Because here's what it defines. It says your little cherry is stretching up, and then right after he gets to the apex of his curve, he's actually losing that stretchiness. The whole time he's going up, he's going back to his original shape. So right before he hits the ground, he's back to his original shape. At the moment of impact, so right here at frame 30, maybe just 1 frame. Well, we'll keep it simple. I mean, naturally speaking, I might go 1 frame after, but right here at frame 30, pull squash stretch back down. So in this case, I'll go to like negative 0.4 might be a little much. Let's go with 2 or 3. So we stretch up into the air, we go back to our original shape, and then right as we impact, we squash back down. Now it's going to be difficult to tell what happens next, but watch carefully. I'm going to go forward just a couple of frames, say to frame 32, and stretch him back up. So watch what happens. Stretch, go back to previous shape, and there you go. It feels like he's actually jumping back up. Now here's what my curve currently looks like. At frame 1, I'm at about negative 0.2. At frame 5, I'm at a value of positive 0.3. At frame 27, maybe even 28 if you want to go that far, we're back to 0. We've gone back to our original shape. Then at frame 30, right there at impact, we quickly dip down to squash him. At frame 32, we stretch him back up. And I'm going to go ahead and give a quick ready check for people to hit that. All right, that is our first squash stretch pass. So now let's just do the same for the other jumps. So here we are during our second bounce. And right before we land, we want to have our squash stretch set back to 0. At the moment of impact, we want it to be a little negative, squash down. Then just a couple of frames later, we want to stretch him back up. We'll do a nice big tall stretch this time because he's getting that last jump in there. Then, since he's coming in for a landing in whipped cream, we're not going to squash him back down. Let's just say here at about 86, he goes back to 0 and keeps his original shape. I feel like whipped cream would be a pretty soft thing to land in. So I feel like we wouldn't see him squash down too much when he impacted. Though if you wanted to, you could say at the moment of impact, he does squash just a little bit, and then just a couple of frames later, maybe extends by 1, and a couple of frames after that goes back to 0, and you get just a little bit of wobble when he lands. And there you go. Now, that's it for squash and stretch. You've actually got those done now. So what I'm going to do is do a really quick rundown of the rotation animation because it's very, very easy. This is like the easiest thing that we have to animate. So let's go all the way back to the beginning of the timeline. At frame 1, I'm going to press Shift-E. Remember, E is the same key for the rotate tool. Hitting Shift-E drops keys on rotation. It doesn't get much more convenient than that. While he's here on the ground, I want you to rotate him forward slightly. Now I'm giving him a rotation of about 10 degrees. Right about here, right before the impact when we've got that other squash stretch key, I'm going to rotate him back around 10 degrees. And that's it. Just like he's rotating back as he's coming down. Then, really all I'm doing here is I'm following those squash stretch keys. Here at 32, rotate him forward again. At 57, right before he hits the ground, rotate him back. I've got him bouncing forward again at 62, so we'll rotate him forward. And we could, actually, just right before his landing, just have him rotated back a little bit. He doesn't have to be perfectly up and down when he hits the ground. In fact, probably look better if he wasn't. It looks like there's something really weird going on here with my stem. So I should probably look into what's going on with that. me go ahead and get a close-up here. Let's go to perspective and frame up. We're already getting a little bit of disruption. Let me see if it has to do with us moving this group around, or if it's rotating the group that's doing it. Because this whole group, well, it's moving just fine. That's good. Yeah, that seems to be what the problem is. And part of it is because of that separation in the geometry, maybe. I've got a strange little bit of flattening, too. Let me see if I can get to the bottom of why that's happening. So he's not inheriting transform, and that's, of course, the way it should be. Let me save my file before I do anything, because I really kind of need to debug this. And also, I'm going to kill out my rotation keys because they're so easy to add back in if I need to. So let's just grab those, and as a temporary measure, since I've saved the file anyway, just grab those and nuke them. And frame up. Okay, so it doesn't have to do with rotation, because even at this point we've got some odd stretching, so that solves that problem. We can even undo and leave that in there. So if we come over here to frame 1, squashing and stretching aren't really doing it. That tells me it might have to do with the actual translation, and it does. Okay. So let's see here. If I move the group, it's happening when I move the group as well. So, that is kind of curious. All right. And it doesn't have to do with any of this stuff, so that all can stay. I'm not too stressed about that. It's just the fact that the group is moving along, which, let's see, if I grab, let's jump back a level, or jump down a level, so to speak. Let's grab the curve and the locator and just try moving those and see what we get. Yep, it's happening here as well, it looks like. Yep, there's some separation going on there. That's all well and good. I can't help but just by the nature of it, the fact that it keeps pointing back toward the curve, I keep thinking it has something to do with the fact that we've got this kind of separation between our stem and our curve, but every other time I've played with this setup, I've never really had an issue there. So I could end up re-rigging the stem if it really, really came down to it. The other thing that you can do, and this is just one of those you have to test and you have to check kinds of things, is take a look at it from your camera's perspective. So this is roughly where our shot's going to be. And as weird as this may sound, now here we've got some really serious stretching, but if you tried it on your end and you weren't seeing anything all that severe, I would leave it. And I have left things like that in animations. If it doesn't end up in the render and doesn't really draw attention to itself in any way, if it would just slow down production, sometimes you just have to kind of cut your losses, and I've been there before. But let me see if I can get around this. What I'm going to do, just on the fly real quick, is create a brand new rig for our stem. So there you go. I have nuked out its curve. And let's jump over here. Let me go back to our standard view for just a minute. So, saved layouts. Let's do the 4 view. Good. And we'll start over here. Zoom in. And I'm going to recreate my curve. This time I'm going to make sure that I go right down the center of the curve. So let's do a point snap here. Click, click, click. And then let's make sure we don't get any more of that separation. So I'll grab CVs, line this up, line this up. Let's go back over to our side view. Really, in the end, it probably just boiled down to needing to test the rig a little bit more in this one case, but I will just go ahead and say outright that I haven't seen this happen before. I'm just fixing it on the fly. Alright, we'll grab our curve point, create deformers, point on curve. Go ahead and set up the wire. So create deformers, wire tool, grab the geometry, enter, grab the wire, enter. Now let's give this a quick test before we go any further. Modify center pivot on our locator. It's all looking pretty good. I mean, there's some weird skewing that happens because of this deformer, but I'm not too stressed about that. Let's grab the curve and the deformer themselves, and let's center up their pivots and move them around, and everything seems to be working just fine. Okay, so now let's put the stem back in the middle of the cherry. Now, we never got rid of our group, remember? We left the group there, and the group is what was actually following the curve. So if I go back over to the hierarchy, we should still see there's the stem group. Here's the duplicated curve. So yeah, everything is there. We can just, okay, we don't really need the, oh, well, that duplicated curve is probably on our cherry, so let's make sure that that is not touched. Curve 2, let's go ahead and call this rig cherry stem curve, like so. And then I'll take the locator and we'll call this control cherry stem. Yeah, I had inherits transform off on the geometry. In fact, it should still be off, which we can verify here. Yeah, it is still off. What I was getting was just some weird separation, which I think had to do with the location at which the curve had been attached. The little offset was causing problems. So now I can take the curve and the control and just parent them back to the group, and everything should just work. Indeed it does. And there we go. Boing, boing, boing. That's actually it. After a quick re-rig. So, if there are no other questions, let's talk about your homework. Your homework is going to be to get this animation finished all the way through. So get your 3 bounces in, handle your rotation, your squashing and stretching. You will animate your stem wobbling up and down. But I'm just going to give you sort of a quick tip. Don't animate it perfectly in time with your bounces. The stem is going to be pulled down by G-forces as you're going up, and as you fall, it'll start to straighten it back out. Then the cherry's going to land and bounce back up in the air, and it's that motion that's going to pull the stem back down. So it's going to have sort of a bouncy style motion, but it'll be offset. That's your hint if you want this to look really natural. Now, if you get really any kind of wobble in there that looks reasonably believable, then I'm really okay. But if you want it to look really, really good, it's kind of a bouncy motion that's offset. It's set a little forward in time. Really, you could just make it bounce up and down just like the cherry, take the entire curve and move it forward a few frames, and that actually works. But I'll let you kind of work on that and figure it out for yourselves. You are also responsible for this little wobble here at the end. Give me a little wobble. Make your stem wobble a little at the end as well. If your animation is playing back really fast, be sure to right-click on your time slider, go to playback speed, and set this to real time and not play every frame free. Because on my machine, if I set this to play every frame free, I get this. So that doesn't work at all. So right-click, playback speed, real time, and that should fix the issue. Okay, so that's it for tonight's class. You guys have made tremendous leaps and bounds tonight. You made it all the way through rigging and all the way through animation. I will get this this video put up as quickly as I'm able so that you can review it. How do we save the animation as a movie file? That will come in the rendering section. Right now, that is completely outside the scope of this lesson. So go ahead and hit Control-S, and that's going to wrap us up for tonight. So thank you all very much. Let's go ahead and end the video.